Thank you all for taking the time to join us and to participate in this great conversation. The theme is virtual teaching and learning, how organizations can support youth and families in 2020. And especially with COVID-19, everything that's been happening in the news. As a result, we're just really fortunate to have these amazing panelists. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow each panelist to do a quick introduction themselves, and then I have some 5 general questions. And then, of course, we'll be taking questions from the audience as well. So without further ado, I'm going to start with Sarah, go down to Rashana, then to Kascia, and then with Lee. So starting with Sarah. Introduction.
There we go. Getting used to Zoom already. My name is Sarah Cussler, and I'm at Yale University. I occupy 2 spaces there where I work at the Poorvu Center for Teaching and Learning, which is basically a pedagogical support, almost institute or center in the middle of campus that supports undergraduates, graduate students, and faculty. And I work in something called the Academic Strategies program. So when students first come onto campus and are strategizing or having to think through, they may have learning differences, they may have other issues that make the college level coursework particularly difficult. We work with them on that. I also work in outreach, public school outreach, through a number of partnerships that Yale has with schools in the area, working with students who are volunteering in various capacities around the New Haven area. And I actually am a relative newcomer to New Haven. I've lived here 2 years, but I am a prior teacher, and I've taught every grade from 6 through 12 in public, urban, suburban, charter, and private schools. And I'm largely an English teacher, though I've also taught ESL, humanities, and even a long-term subposition with middle school sex ed. Anyway, that's my story.
Hi, my name is Rashana Graham. I'm a 6th grade educator in New Haven. I've been teaching, this will be the end of my 13th year this year. I've taught in a variety of places. I've taught in charter, I've taught in public school, from Connecticut to the Bronx and back. I am currently teaching social studies and science, but I have been a literacy teacher for most of my career.
I think I'm next. My name is Kascia Williams. I'm the Assistant Education Director at New Haven Reads, which is a nonprofit organization that helps students who struggle with reading improve their reading skills. We also have a community book bank. I also help out with operations. And I also teach high school US history at Common Ground High School in New Haven. So yeah, that's my story.
All right, I believe I am next. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Lee Osorio. I am the Children's Programs Manager at LEAP, and with my amazing team, we run programming pre-COVID for 500 children, and we employ over 200 young people throughout the city of New Haven to work with us to provide literacy programming and social development programming to our children. Let's see, I am born and raised in New Haven, and it is an amazing opportunity to not only be here in this panel and to have an opportunity to tell you guys what we're doing in our individual agencies, but overall to answer some amazing questions on how we can, or what we're doing right now. To address some of these concerns, I got muted there, to address the concern with this pandemic now. So I'm excited. So Luis, I'll bring it back to you.
Oh, thank you, everyone. That's exciting. That's why all these wonderful panelists. So the first question is kind of maybe the most obvious question that we're all kind of thinking, how do we help children and families with their educational needs in this precise moment? And then whoever's inspired first can start off with an answer.
I'll go first. We're currently, Monday was our first day of programming at LEAP, and we are running program for 350 children while trying to follow strict guidelines of COVID, social distancing. So we have a hybrid program that we are running. 1 week will be, it'll be a 4-week program. And it'll alternate between 1 week virtual and 1 week in person. And our children to counselor ratios is 3 to 1 to make sure that our kids are safe, that our counselors are safe, and that we're still able to provide programming for our families. How we got to this point was by creating surveys and asking our parents and just the city of New Haven what their needs were. We are in a moment where we cannot assume for our parents. We need to hear directly from them and then design based on their needs. And that's how we've been operating. We're constantly putting out their surveys because our parents' needs change on a weekly basis. We still have a lot of parents who unfortunately still remain unemployed, and we have a lot of parents who are first responders as well. So making sure that we are providing services for them in the way that they need it in this moment is our main target and priority.
Well, I think for New Haven Reads in particular, we were shocked when we realized that we had to close, of course. But our education director, with me and our team of great staff, really put together a distance learning model. We really tried hard to translate that into something that students could do from home. I think we really realized the need that students would have once schools close, that this would be way larger than a summer slide, right? So we really wanted to do our part in tackling that. And like I said, me along with our education director, mostly her, came up with a great distance learning model to replicate our programs online. We also partnered with CFAL, a nonprofit in New Haven, to get technology out to our students. And our executive director has been doing a lot of work to get technology to as many of our students who may not have it as possible. And unfortunately, we had to close our book bank because of obvious reasons. But recently, we've just reopened 2 days a week following safety guidelines and still trying our best to get books into the community. New Haven, while schools were closed, had schools open for meal distribution, and we took that opportunity to distribute books as well. So we had some really great volunteers delivering books to those distribution sites. And I'm really trying to make sure that during this time, students stay engaged in our program, but also engaged in reading as much as possible with everything going on.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Lee was talking about and kind of like just making sure we're meeting parents and students where they are. It's nothing more important than actually listening to them and letting them have a voice. And what I found is that during this time, most parents really just need like an ear. You don't even recognize how much we are usually together and how much communication we have and how much time we're spending as like in person until like you go into this crisis. And so like what I was hearing from parents when we were still in school was just like, thank you for calling. It wasn't like I wanna make sure we have X, Y, and Z going, but it's mostly like, thank you for calling, because as a mom, it is a struggle being home all day long with your children and trying to teach them and help them with their stuff virtually. And some of us are still working. We're working at home and we're trying to juggle. So I think that like the most important thing we can do to help is to just reach out and hear people, because it helps them feel a little bit stronger and able to carry on. But I do want to add that, like, I also work summer camp, and so most parents were saying the same thing that Lee was saying. Is just like, sometimes I want to do it virtually, sometimes I want a little bit of in person, because we want to kind of break up the monotony of being home and being online all day.
Thank you all. That's really useful and interesting for me to hear. I have been very frustrated during the course of this pandemic because I feel the need around me, and we've all been split up into separate rooms suddenly. There's a famous psychologist named Maslow, and there's this pyramid that he has called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the very basic level are things like food and water and shelter. And the frustration for me has been that in gaining access to education, suddenly students have another hurdle, which is they need appropriate hardware and they need connectivity. So Yale early on didn't get involved in both of those things. So there was, first of all, an undergraduate group of charitable organizations on campus that took the money they had for the rest of the semester and then got donations going. So they got $300,000 in donations that they were able to use to try to get Chromebooks into the hands of 3rd through 8th graders, because as I understand it, the high school age kids had the appropriate computers. And so that was great. There's another organization that's been developed at Yale called the Yale Community for New Haven Fund. And Yale will match donations up to $5 million. And I think they've given out like $1.5 million. And if you go to their site, and at the end, we can put some of these resources on some page. There's a list of all of the places that they've given money to, but that's some of it. They also gave money to computers. But in terms of the internet connectivity, my understanding is that is still a source of some discussion and difficulty. And I've heard that there's an endpoint that's been put at Lincoln Bassett School so that there's a 3-block radius around that school where kids are connected. And that's kind of a proof of concept, but it's not through the whole district yet. And there are places like Comcast that are offering coverage until, January, and then who knows what happens then. So I'm concerned on behalf of New Haven kids, Hamden kids, West Haven kids, all the kids in our community that are affected by this kind of deficit. In terms of my own background at Yale and working with Yale undergraduates, so I think this speaks more to Yale, or to New Haven high school students, or perhaps middle school students. I also think that some naming for students what the problem is part of addressing the challenge. So talking to students about, you need a quieter space and you need to structure a routine. You might even need extension browsers that make it so that you aren't distracted by certain fun things online. Or we've actually had to say those kinds of things to Yale undergraduates. So I think that older students would benefit from that kind of talk too. And then the last thing that I would say is that as a teacher, there were multiple times that I faced a book room problem where I didn't have enough books. And so I found myself going through the community and finding used copies, or developing classroom libraries, or making big Xerox copy lists and handing them out. And I feel like as teachers, your impulse is to make that kind of change. And it has to be much larger. It has to be larger than the school and the district. It really has to be the whole community at this point that's networking. So I'm very glad that this opportunity offered itself, just so that people can start talking about how else we can optimize and help kids.
No, thank you. Those were amazing answers. And especially, at least in my role, I kind of do a little bit of everything which all you do as a branch manager in New Haven Free Public Library. And we've just started curbside pickup, as a free public library, and this idea that patrons can make appointments, we can provide books available to them, and it's just really reimagining our various services. All of you kind of touched on this point, and I wanted to kind of expand upon it more because I think it's very important for you all to kind of share your precise perspective. So we said all these various things that are happening, but what are the biggest obstacles to, say, online or virtual learning for a lot of families? We're dealing with, quiet place to study, food insecurity, connectivity, parental support, working parents, and I just want to open that up to the panel just so we can learn from your perspective, just to kind of really think what you believe is like the biggest obstacle and how we can kind of work together to address them.
One of the largest points, not just for my staff, but certainly for my enrolled children, is the mental health piece. We've gone from being in school one day to then shutting it down the next and not being in school for a very long time. And they've lost that social piece. They've lost the ability to have that interaction with their peers that is so important for their development and at any age. And we're now realizing how much mental health really hasn't been a focal point in any curricula. And now there's a little bit of patchwork and that we have to do to help our children, our youth, ourselves to really work through a lot of the challenges. And it seems really easy or really attractive to say, oh, we're working from home, you're going to be going to school from home, and that seems very attractive and very feasible, but it's actually much harder than anyone really in the entire world anticipated it to be. So that's the hardest part for us is that. And now that we're in person, explaining to our young people that they're so excited and they just want to run up and hug us because they haven't seen us for so long. So we actually have to walk around with stop signs where it's just like, it's not that we don't want to, but we can't. And, trying to process our children to that is very, very difficult.
I agree with Lee 100%. And I think in addition to that, we have a lot of tech literacy issues. A lot of parents don't really know how to use all of this stuff. And I can speak for my own classroom. We used Google Classroom, but I was there every single step of the way. So like, Ms. Graham, I don't know what to click. I can tell them that. But when they're at home and now mom, who like just got a smartphone, needs to help them, it just isn't happening. If we're gonna move forward with this kind of thing, and this is something that I truly believe, we have to do a little bit of in-person before we can go back to online, because we have to teach the kids and the parents how to use the tech.
Absolutely. I'll back that up with creating the space. Like classrooms are specifically designed to maximize the education piece, right? And our homes are not designed for that. There's so many distractions, so much going back and forth. If parents have to go to work, then there now needs to be a new wave of somebody taking care of those children, right? And what's happening. And then another obstacle is only having one piece of tech for one household, right? Like if parents might not be working off-site and they're working from home, but the child also has to do homework, how are you going to split that time if there's only one computer at home? So that's another large piece obstacle that New Haven Public Schools did disperse as many pieces of equipment as they could. LEAP also, we emptied all of our shelves with Chromebooks and desktops, and we gave them immediately to our families to try to aid with that as
well. I think both Lee and Rashana touched on some of the important issues. So a lot of parents don't know how to use the tech that their students are using, so they can't guide them in using it. Also, a lot of students don't have the technology and come from big families that need to share one laptop. What I've also seen at Common Ground is since it's a high school and we have a lot of older students, they are the primary caregivers for their siblings when parents are at work. So they are checking into class every day. They're trying to juggle being there for their siblings, and they're also trying to juggle their workload and like making sure that they graduate on time if they're seniors, which is really difficult. So I think it's really important kind of touching on what Lee said, to really prioritize our students' mental health and like giving them space. Like, it's really important, and we want to make sure that they reach their reading goals and that they start the year off well. But like, we are going through a pandemic, and that's not the only thing. We have protests all across the country, and a lot of, at least at the high school is in an urban area, a lot of them feel affected by all of that. And they really need the space to be able to decompress and with their friends, even if it's on a Zoom during class time. So that's what I've seen a lot, is really giving them a space to say, okay, like, your mind and your mental health and your wellness comes before the history that I have to teach you. You are prioritized. And I think that's something that's missing from all of these discussions a lot of times about what we should do next. I think it's really important to keep that at the forefront.
I couldn't agree more with that, that impulse, and we'll be talking more about that. I think that's been an issue for us at Yale also. I came across some statistics from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development that are kind of stunning. 1 out of every 5 Americans are dependent on cell phones for access to the internet. And for those earning under $30,000, only 50% of them have access. So at Yale, 20 to 30% of each class is what they call FGLI, first generation low income. And we've seen that evident in classes on Zoom, because suddenly you can't see people's faces. They are names only. And it's a curious way of being tagged as not having connectivity. And so the thing that strikes me very much like what Kascia was saying is that it's easy not to be seen in a virtual classroom. It's easy to slip away. And if you are late to school and coming down the hallway and the assistant principal sees you, or the counselor catches you, and there are people that catch you in the hall and say, you should be here, or check in with you, those spontaneous interactions are lost. So I guess that's my main, I completely agree about the need for personal connection, and the need, perhaps, this generation will begin to think of the digital space as a more personal one than we have. I think there's a possibility of that. I see that in my own kids. So perhaps there are ways that we can set up spaces that are virtual that will work as community building spaces for them. And we can purposefully structure them, yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Louise. I just wanted to piggyback on that. I work at New Canaan Country School for summer camp, and one of the ways that they're focusing on prioritizing that mental health space is they have this thing called lunch tables. And it's so crazy that the kids just log on to talk to each other about like random things. And so for just an hour out of every day, the kids can come online and just talk to each other. And I think that, like, moving forward, I definitely would like to see that in classrooms too.
Initially, Zoom has felt like, such a pale imitation of real life. But now that we've been stuck here long enough, we recognize the value of the personal connection, even virtually. Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's so true. I mean, we're hearing all these great points about individualized connection and kind of just connecting to the screen. That kind of leads to my next question. So we have this social distance, we have this online learning. You know, how do we maintain these close relationships and rapport with children and families? Because that's been a huge thing, where I think it was Rashana who said, just, you know, calling and just checking in with the family was such a huge win, and the mental health issues we've been discussing. And then, you know, inadvertently kind can marginalize if it's, oh, so-and-so is just calling in, or we can't see them. What is that? What assumptions do we make about their home life? So how do we kind of make kind of really a huge part of learning, how do people feel seen, and, you know, the individualized attention? Any thoughts on how we navigate those issues?
I mean, I would say Kascia mentioned this, right? Where it's like, it's their space, right? So, you know, when you make that connection, it's just like, how are you doing? Like, what's going on with you? Like, I'm not gonna just jump into my session, but more so like, what's going on, and having the flexibility to say, okay, like, even if I ask a question and this child, you know, seems to need the space to just engage in dialogue, right? Even if it's just you listening and not really having a moment to even ask further questions or deeper questions, or it's just like, okay, you know what? I'm not gonna do this history lesson today. I'm not gonna do this activity. Tell me more. What, you went outside and you found a bug? What bug was it? Was it a spider? You tough for getting that spider? Like allowing them to just get it out, you know, and to feel like they are being heard and that somebody is actively just there to absorb it all, and maintaining that peace, but also I would say acknowledging the elephant in the room. Like, we're in a pandemic. Often I've seen too many times where it's just like, no, let's try to bring in a virtual setting full blown, like, you know, classrooms. It's not possible. We don't have that piece. So it's like, acknowledge it. Like, look, we know this is awkward. We know this is weird. We know this is not the traditional way that we're doing it. We know there is a pandemic. You have to wear your mask and you have to clean your hands. Talking about it with our children, period, in whatever way that they understand is absolutely necessary, in all platforms and all ages.
Well, I guess I would speak directly again to the Yale student experience. Immediately after the pandemic happened, we saw a serious drop off in the number of students who were coming to the Writing Center. So these are either to work with students or to work with adults. And it was close to 30%, even more so in the science fields. And so there was a very concerted, the one group that didn't experience that drop off were the people that had pre-existing relationships and sort of a routine that had already been set up. So they were coming for tutorials pretty routinely, and those were pretty resilient. So they sort of targeted students and had us write them directly. And there's been a change, and this summer, now that we're past the spring and the emergency stage, there has been a change where the students that are coming on and taking coursework during the summer are using the online resources in a much more robust way. So in the New Haven Public Schools, it may be a different story, but there is a kind of, people are getting a little bit more accustomed to the medium. But I've been involved in the transition of some programming that's usually on campus in person with New Haven Youth and West Haven Youth, to a virtual space. And one of them is US Grant, which is a program that works with middle school students. And it's usually 6 weeks that runs in the summer. And we've switched it to online, but in the courses that the kids are taking, there's a real emphasis on that community building, on doing things like Simon Says and charades and everyone introducing themselves with movement. I mean, some of the stuff you can do in classrooms are kind of fun on Zoom. It's just that it has to be shorter. So from a curricular standpoint, like for Rashana, that's hard because if you've got certain curricular goals you need to get to by the end of the year, you have less time synchronously if you were to be able to use this kind of software, to be able to get there. So that's a little more difficult. They also have been working with summer scholars who are the Pathways to Science students, and planning similar kind of play online to help create virtual community and get kids more adjusted to learning online.
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. I would like to definitely say when we first designed our virtual or VP programming once the pandemic was fully here, and we had to go from in-person to virtual. Yeah, we planned out for 45 minutes to an hour, and we quickly realized that it was not going to happen at all. And the most that we could actually get was maybe 15 to 20 minutes before our kids and ourselves started to experience Zoom fatigue. So it was very clear that, you know, again, the models that we would operate in person were completely different virtually, and that we had to be flexible to make that adjustment.
Were you gonna make a point, Kascia?
I was just gonna piggyback off of that and say, as far as New Haven Reads goes, our program model pretty much translated to a virtual space, thankfully. It's just not as long, right? So we would have a whole full hour, whereas now we kind of really have to make it 45 minutes, because if we have another hour of tutoring coming next, we need to give time for everybody to log on, if there's tech issues. So that's one thing. At New Haven Reads, I think it's been not seamless, but it has translated. As far as teaching goes, when you have a curriculum that you need to get through and time is very minimized, it's difficult. It's because you want to prioritize your students, you want to make them feel heard, you want to give them that space, but you also don't want them to graduate without having the knowledge that they need to move into the next phase of their lives. And they understand that. And when they have those conversations when you have those conversations with them, they know that they need both those things, but it's hard for them, right? The same way it's hard for us as educators, right? My students had 8 classes that they had to check into every day on a rotating schedule. And one of our students ended up writing, a group of students ended up writing all the staff and saying that they were just severely overwhelmed and that they couldn't focus on it all. And we as a staff really had to try our best to lighten the load and realize that what we could do in a classroom, we cannot do virtually. It just doesn't work, especially in such a short amount of time. So we had to just come to the conclusion that some things need to be let go. We won't be able to do it all. And that's it.
Kascia, you hit the nail on the head. You have to just let some things go. This past spring, there were some things in the curriculum that I'm like, nah, we can't do this right now. And so luckily I was at the end of my history curriculum and I needed to teach the preamble. And so teaching the preamble in itself is very difficult because it's very antiquated and it wasn't written with everyone in mind. So in that moment, and we were just at the time where the Black Lives Matter movement started popping up. Well, now we're going to integrate the preamble with everything that's going on because it spoke directly to the kids. And I think that moving to this online curriculum, one thing that teachers have to keep in mind is that regardless of your curriculum, you need to stay current. So I married the two of them. And by marrying the two of them, I was able to give the student voice in what was happening on the outside, but I still was able to teach the preamble the way I was supposed to. And I think that teaching definitely has to change if we're going to move forward in these virtual platforms, and teachers have to be a little more innovative and they got to do a little more work so that they can reach the students and the students actually feel like their needs are being met as far as mentally, and they're still getting their work done.
By the way, that's impressive teaching. That's just really good teaching. That's what everyone should aspire to.
It's amazing just to hear all the creativity. In this precise moment, we need to have creative solutions. But definitely a theme that's been coming that, yes, there are things that we can do virtually, but nothing can really compare to that, face-to-face interaction, that human connection. And then as different plans and strategies and thoughts are coming up with across the nation and the world of, blending programs in terms of classrooms, limited social distance, and classrooms are just in interactions, what are some of the best practices or just thoughts in your mind now that how we should change or continue certain aspects of our teaching style, right? So eventually, fingers crossed, knock on wood, there will be some kind of new normal or semi-new normal. There will be some form of social distance, but I think what we're learning through this experience, some things weren't working, and there's an opportunity to kind of retool and reimagine or kind of maintain the things that are essential. And so there are a lot of great points about, just creating space and having current event conversations How do we see kind of the new normal changing with the appropriate social distance, and how can we reimagine what the in-person experience can be?
I mean, I'll say that I think those are really good questions. I don't know if anyone saw that Facebook photo that was going around it's from some Shanghai newspaper, and it shows all of these elementary school students in hats that have like pool noodles on them and balloons, and they're supposed to stay a certain radius away from other students. And I thought, this is just a nightmare. And now here we are, and the CDC guidelines read something like desks all facing the same direction, 6 feet away, lunch in classrooms, staggered arrival times. So the primary question I would have, again, as a prior teacher really, and the concern I would have is that, what does a COVID classroom look like? We're so concerned about the economy and the safety of kids, that what does the pedagogy look like? When we've had an emphasis on cooperative learning and student-centered instruction, hopefully in some classrooms that's been going on, and now they're supposed to be in rows again and all looking in one direction, and the teacher has a mask on, so you can't even see the person's expression. So those are some of the worries I have. I can say that I do believe Google Docs offers an opportunity. So if students do have computers, there can be cooperative work on Google Slides, on Google Docs, that they're working on together. And I've done that in classrooms and it works. I think that this moment, like Rashana was saying, represents an enormous opportunity. In my entire career as an educator, I do not remember a period where everyone pushed reset like this. You know, from the new teachers to the veteran teachers, everybody's like, okay, we're remaking the lesson plan. Like, this is different. And there's a cooperative element in that. There's an opportunity for people really to share on the same level. There's some good opportunity in it, but it's constraining. It's very constraining. I guess that would say, I like to think that, for example, in a hybrid model where you have students in school for, say, a week and then out of school for a week, that there's a possibility for project-based learning there when they take something home, or for a real-life application when they take it home. There are some extensions that were harder in the, whatever it was, 8 to 3 p.m. day that might be possible, but it takes some creative reimagining and some talking collaboratively about it.
I just want to piggyback on what Sarah was saying. She brought up my favorite word, project-based learning. Miss Cheryl in the chat said less is more. And this is kind of like the shift that needs to start happening. And so in the less is more thing is this space for project-based learning, because you assign this project that's not due until the end of the week. So kids are getting that time to like think about it. If they have to like help at home with like siblings or whatever the case is, they have this large amount of time to work on this one project. And I think that as we're moving and we're reimagining what the new normal is going to be, that project-based learning is going to be like at the top of the curve, because of the simple fact that like we have to give kids time to get this work done. We can't expect quick turnaround in this kind of environment.
Yeah, I agree with what Rashana said. We can't expect to assign homework one day and expect it back tomorrow morning. Like that model in distance learning is not going to work. I also think that when students, if schools start in distance learning in the fall, that I feel like you can't in the same way just start with work. Like you can't have one day of like talking about the class and then start with work the next day. Because you really need time to build community virtually. And I'm not sure what that'll look like for me with students that I've never met before in person, because when I left, I had already knew my students and my students knew me. So it was a lot easier. If I'm in distance learning in the fall with a bunch of students that I've never met, that's a completely different animal. And I don't know what building a community with that student population is going to look like yet, but I do think it's really important that the community is built before the learning starts.
Absolutely. I think everybody has really synthesized everything very well. I just want to add that I'm not sure how possible this would be, but teachers need to be designing what the model will be, right? It needs to be placed in their hands as to, they've been doing the work this entire time, right? Like they've been building new strategies and new ways of engaging their children and really having a little bit more flexibility in what that curriculum is, right? And not being so strict that they have to do this and do that. Even in person pre-COVID, having homework assigned one day and then bring it back tomorrow, the next day, never worked either. So it didn't work for everybody. So, giving the teachers back the opportunity to say what works for you, what's unique in your classroom, how can you make this happen, since they are the ones in the front lines who are going to be implementing this, is going to be a priority. And like Kascia, you just said, transitioning our children, back into school, it hasn't been in their minds. One thing that we've been dealing with LEAP is our children been sleeping all day and up all night, and they have no sense, and we've been trying to help them with routines and getting into a healthy routine, and not being night owls, playing video games all day or all night, and transitioning them into that. But is school going to be a full 8 hours with their masks on in their classrooms, not being able to interact? It just doesn't make sense. So, we really need to think about, how some of the decisions that are going to be made are going to have a large impact on minds that are already trying to adjust to something that nobody expected. And we need to, Kascia, you said this again, we need to prioritize them where they are so that we can also be healthy ourselves and implement a curriculum that is objective based and not necessarily stringent on time and dates.
Those are, all amazing points. Just really the emphasis on like building community and meeting the students and the families where they are, and to be willing to reimagine services and to think about. I think one thing that's become clear in this conversation, that there's so many things to consider, and obviously no one institution can address all aspects of it, and so that kind of leads to this last main question of, how do we as different, community leaders or stakeholders, in the virtual learning space for students, family learning, education, how do we come together and build each other's capacity to kind of address all these various challenges? If we're thinking, of project-based learning, so a shameless plug, I'm thinking, if more schools are doing projects, that's more research at the library, or creating a safer space, for kids to talk and discuss. But again, public library can't do it all on its own. LEAP after school, New Haven Reads, in the classroom, in the university level, right? So, and even just think more broadly, what are some of the stakeholders that we would love to be here who aren't necessarily here that we can try to engage with, or how do we kind of come together to address a lot of these issues?
So one thing that LEAP did, our executive director, Mr. Henry Fernandez, he held youth meetings every Wednesday at 11 a.m. where everybody in New Haven came together. If you were a youth agency, and not only did we get an opportunity to figure out as a team what we were all individually attempting to accomplish, but also keep each other in the loops with what our struggles were and how we could, again, as a city, come together to provide, again, waves of technology and how to help our young people through this time. So with that is collective and collaboration, coming together and as a unit, not as separate entities anymore that are providing based on their own models, programming or services, but coming together and really having an opportunity to share out, similar to what we're doing now. Look, these are the things that we've encountered. This is the way that we've been trying to address some of these issues, and this is how we're moving forward. And then having just one big a spreadsheet where we can provide these services, regardless whether you work in the agency or not, just creating that knowledge within youth agencies and just CD leaders to say, oh, I know that New Haven Reads is doing this, and you're able to provide that knowledge. I know that LEAP is doing that, and provide that knowledge. So creating one central base of where families can come and receive services or get information is step one.
I also think one of the benefits, even though it's hard to see sometimes, of being virtual is that I feel like I can be more involved in more things because it's all happening virtually, right? So New Haven Reads holds a few tutor trainings throughout the year, and they're usually well attended, but we recently had our first virtual training, and it was like one of the most well attended trainings we've had. And I really think that's partially because we're in a pandemic and people are home, right? But also because being virtual gives people the chance to be in and doing other things, you know what I mean? So like Lee said, having the knowledge and being able to spread it, because our students, our families, I feel like are looking for those resources and can more tap into them. If they have the technology and the space and the connectivity, they can tap into them, even if it's for half the hour or 20 minutes to get a piece of the information or some of it, or involve their kids. It does bring about a little more availability. So I think really, like Lee said, spreading that knowledge and giving it to our students, to our families, and letting them know that things are happening virtually and that those resources are available to them.
So as a university, Yale has money, which I've already talked about a bit, but they also have pretty rich resources and human capital. So they've got undergraduates and graduate students and employees that all want to help. They have resources like libraries and collections of fossils and things like that, and the Beinecke Library, rare books and things to share with students. And they have the experts. They have these content specialists in their graduate students and their professors. So there are a number of outreach organizations that I wanted to share with you today to tell you about, partly because, Luis, if you have kids coming in who look like they would be candidates for some of these programs, it would be great, or Rashana or Kascia or Lee, any of you. So I'm going to put them in chat, but the first is to subscribe to Yale events, and basically, let's see if I can do this. Here we go. I'll walk you through that in a minute, but there's a way to sign up for all sorts of stuff. There's a calendar. There were 110 offerings for public school students and kids this past year, and many of them have, some of them have gone virtual and some of them have not. But the one that I'd like to make a shameless plug for, and in addition to US grants, so if you have a student who's in the New Haven or West Haven schools, there's a middle school program over the summer that's run by Yale undergraduates, and it's just been terrific. And we did pivot to virtual space and have been impressed at the strength of the participation. The other programs are Pathways to Science that has graduated, I think, 1,800 kids at this point, and has like close to 180 different workshops, hands-on demonstrations, science-related tasks that kids can get involved with. And that is something that you have to be nominated for. But as a community member, you can nominate kids. You don't necessarily have to have perfect grades, but you do need to have academic interest. So some of that programming has gone virtual. And so it would be great if more kids in the community could participate. And then the last program that I wanted to mention is Pathways to Arts and Humanities, which has more to do with, there's a drama school, New Voices in Theater, a playwriting thing that did go online, poetry workshops, and they're building workshops for the fall. So if you know any students that you think would be appropriate or should check it out, I'm going to give you that right now, because we would be delighted to have them. And I have a feeling that this will go away in chat. So maybe we can, once we close the session. So if there's some kind of record where we can put some of these resources and make them available to everybody.
Yeah, we'll have some space available too. And what we'll even do, kind of once we take general questions from the audience, we'll provide just those who are participating these opportunities to share what they're working on, their different projects. I know there's a lot of different folks who can learn about resources and things, but at least kind of what I've been hearing, it's, there are existing resources that are out there, and just kind of how do we work together in terms of communication and just like mindfulness of just kind of navigating the space where these things exist. This is how we can reimagine, or even just the comment of, oh, we would have to nominate a particular person, or just working with stakeholders. I've been lucky with Yale University and other stakeholders to create programs at the library, whether it's Peabody Evolutions or Yale Center for British Art, Yale History of Science, History of Medicine Department. So we've done some all ages programming, adults and youth, and just working with people to reimagine, especially in this moment. We can all kind of think creatively. We all have license to be creative in that way. I just want to be mindful of time, since it is like 4:24, unless anyone else had an extra comment to say how do we build capacity. I do want to allow our participants time to ask all of you great panelists their own questions. So I want to give time for that.
Are there any questions from the general audience? We'd like to hear from you. You can type them in the chat panel, and we'll deal with them. We'll answer them.
There's a rich discussion that's been going on in chat. I was just looking at it.
A lot of folks coming in and having different things, kind of the sidebar discussions have been having in the chat, but something else that people have been mentioning in the chat, and this idea of wanting to collaborate more, and that's maybe something I know someone had wrote, what can the Literacy Coalition Greater New Haven do? All these various different stakeholders, and there's a comment of, oh, a clearinghouse, but having these conversations, because this is the first we've been emailing the last several weeks, but it's great to actually virtually meet all of you, but to have these kind of ongoing conversations to say, we're dealing with such and such a program. I think Lee who mentioned, just to be able to refer people to resources to say, well, this is the library has curbside pickup, or we have this various other summer learning programs or camps. This is definitely something. I know that there is a CFAL camp. I know we'll give Greg some time to share a little bit about that, but there's other opportunities that we can just create space and continue to build. That's
It looks like we have a question coming in from Mia. Mia, I'll read your question. What can we do as community members to be a part of the solution for these children? How can we get involved? Community members that aren't involved with any agencies at this time. I guess we all won't hop on Mia and ask her to volunteer first, but I'll give it to the panelists to get her first.
I mean, do you want to go ahead, Lee?
It's okay. Yeah.
I think that one of the things I've been seeing is we really should be reaching out to those in power. So writing letters to our congresspeople, our senators, letting them know what we expect of them for our students and ourselves, right? To keep them safe and make sure that they're getting the education that they need. I really think this is a time where we need to have our voices heard. And in however way that looks like for you. That's what I really think is important during this time, because a lot of decisions are being made, and I feel like my personal opinion is that I feel like the people's opinions are really getting left out of these decisions, and we really need to find ways to make it clear to our government, our Board of Eds, our aldermen, right, what we want to see for our cities, for our communities, for our districts.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, hands down, you said that in an amazing way. Other ways that you can certainly help is perhaps through agencies like ourselves, right? We're always looking for volunteers, whether that be virtually to read out loud a book to our kids or something like that, even if their cameras are off, right? And their mics are muted, just listening to someone reading can certainly be helpful. If you have a particular skill or a hobby that you're very good at, we're always looking for volunteers in that sense. Again, if you have if you have materials to either record yourself doing this particular activity, and then it can be uploaded to pages so that families can just use it as a resource and have a place to click a video, right? And have some in-house activities with their children. So I would say certainly reach out to those in power, absolutely, number one, and then seek within your own cities to see what are some youth agencies that are still active and are still, or whether in person or virtually, that might need volunteers at this time.
I have a question. What do people think about, how do we support youth athletes who lost such a crushing part of their support network that really can't be done virtually? Like the school newspaper, we can move that online, but the football team, that's harder. How do we support student athletes?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's, we can't do anything contact related, and we can't do anything around dribbling, right? Especially basketball, for example, like they have to share a ball, right? And it's also a very contact sport. So we've lost that part. But we're working on the classroom side of sports, right? Like, how do you, just sticking with basketball, what are the internal jobs that you can get, like a coaching job, nurses or certified sports athletes, for example, that help you stretch out, right, or patch you up if you are hurt in the court. What are the different positions? Point guard, small forward, etc. What are the roles of the refs? So really getting down to the basics, on top of really working out and getting them outside and letting them know, like, okay, you might not be in the court, but how are you maintaining your physical stamina up, right? Like, what are the calisthenics? How many push-ups? How many sit-ups? What are you intaking, right? How much water are you drinking? Or have you substituted your water because you're home with soda and juice and all these things that really are going to put in deficit your physical ability? So there's a piece there that is an excellent question, Craig. How do we, get back our student athletes back into that mind frame? But starting them off with, okay, let's start working out, let's get down to the basics, and then hopefully we'll have a better answer once we start figuring out what the fall is going to look like, what the schools look like once we do reopen, and what that means for sports.
Awesome, thanks, Lee. It looks like we have time for one last question. It came in from Cheryl. How do you think we could use this opportunity to get more high school and students mobilized to volunteer in these organizations?
I mean, I think students, I think number one, most importantly, is having conversations with, at least with high school students, that's what I work with in the classroom, having conversations, even if you think that they're the topic is too big for them, right? So have the conversations, because a lot of students don't realize where the need is, right? They don't even, especially students in urban communities, a lot of them don't see the oppressive structures around them, right? So I think having those conversations so that they know that there is a need for these volunteers. And then when they see that, when they are adept in the issue, they're more willing to fix it. So I think having those conversations about bigger issues that in that way that they want to help fix them.
No, that was great. There's just one other question Leslie has. What are ways to engage an entire class who have been withdrawn or show little interest in participating in virtual learning?
That's an excellent question. I think that's the moment to either run a survey or have some one-on-one time with each individual class participant, and just check in. Hey, like, what's going on? What is it, the way that I'm teaching? Is it what I'm teaching? What are you interested in? And maybe redesigning something around what their interests are. But project-based activities is definitely, like Rashana said, is the winner, where they have one assignment or one project that they're really interested in, and then allowing enough buffer time for them to get it done, or start accomplishing the task, and then check back in at the end of the week.
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about that question about sports, and thinking about the fact that there has been a lot of loss for this group of students. I mean, it hasn't just been sports, it's been the loss in some sense of choir or of drama productions, all sorts of productions. And my hope would be that maybe through technology, some of the dryland workouts or the using various things like Soundtrap, or there are ways to capture voices and put them together. And that this particular community of kids is going to be more creative than ever. We've already seen that they're willing to get out there in the street and march for what they believe in. And so they are more pressed to be more creative than some students have been. But I kind of believe that they will figure it out, some of it, hard as it may be.
Sorry, I got disconnected for a moment, but I know that there are some groups, and this is back to the question about the sports, some groups who are doing no contact drills for kids. So like practicing the moves that they should make. Sorry, I'm not a sports person, but I'm just sharing. I do know there are communities that are coming together, and they're not being led by like schools or companies or nonprofits that could get in trouble for this kind of stuff, but they're coming together as parents and just trying to run these drills so that the kids stay in shape and they keep moving, and they also have that social aspect. But they are making sure to follow the guidelines of like masks and 6 feet apart distance.
And I know someone asked earlier about keeping students engaged, and that has been tough from a curriculum standpoint, from a teacher standpoint, right? But I also feel like we need to taper our expectations. Like in the classroom, the students aren't engaged all the time, 24/7, right? And so I think I had to personally say, okay, like my students are home, we're talking through a screen, I'm assigning them work and then leaving them to their devices basically and checking in. I can't expect them to be 100% engaged all the time. And I think in distance learning, you kind of have to come to terms with the fact that it's not the same.
Yeah, one final piece with that is maybe your group size also affects how much your children are engaged, and how much they want to participate. Also, who's within the groups also makes a big difference. So, asking them like, hey, like, who's your friends or something like that, that they would normally hang out with or be in class with, that they want to look forward to being in a group session together. That is one thing that works for us at LEAP. Because and with the accountability too, where it's like, hey, we're so and so, and they're like, oh my God, let me text them, or let me call her, let me make sure that they get on, or they'll jump in the session separately, individually, but they're waiting for the time that they're supposed to log in if they know who's going to be in the group ahead of time, along with what the content is and what they're going to be doing for the day, along with the length of the time that they're supposed to be in class or in a section.
This has been great. I've learned a lot from this conversation, and hopefully it's like the first of many conversations that kind of lead into new actions and reimaginings of what new education can be in this moment. If there's one thing that I know for sure is that we'll all have to collaborate together, because we know one institution can do it all. And there are a lot of different things to consider, from mental health to access to space to parent working conditions, students being primary caregivers at home at times. So we didn't even mention all the various issues with speaking other languages other than English and the like. So we're definitely an ongoing conversation. There's just so much and I'm just really grateful that we have so many great community members who are just so engaged and willing to reimagine and just take it one step at a time to help folks learn in this new normal. So thank you all for taking time. Now I'll pass it over to Dave and the Literacy Coalition for anything to, I guess, lead us out.
I just want to thank everyone. Luis, you, Sarah, Lee, Kascia, Rashana, thank you very much for taking some time out of your afternoon to lend us your experience and expertise. I'll remind everyone that we did record this event, and we hope to make that available for people who want to review it, for others who want to see it. That's going to take us a little while, I think, to get pulled together. Everyone who attended today, I think, gave an email in order to log in. And once we decide when and where that recording is going to be, is going to live, we'll let you all know. We'll give the panelists, of course, a first chance to look at the recording before we release it publicly. But again, thank you to the panel. Thank you to Luis. Thank you to everyone who attended today. We hope this is the first of many online events. And of course, we do hope to get back to some of our live events at some point in the future when it's safe to do that. Thank you again.